Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third Insight session in the 6 Weeks to Flexible Work and Life Success series. This series is part of a broader effort to bring leaders, managers, teams, and individuals together to reimagine work and life through this COVID-19 crisis and beyond. I'm Callie Williams-Yost, and I'm joined today by my producer, Lauren Fossbenner. Okay, so today we're talking about shared leadership as the cultural foundation of strategic work flexibility. And we're going to explore the unique combination of trust, performance, and empathy required to build that foundation as we follow the principles for reimagining work and life in this very challenging period. What it means to have a shared leadership foundation is that everybody together is agreeing that we're going to keep it simple, that we're going to start with where we are, that we're going to be about intention and not perfection, that we're going to keep prioritizing with each other, and we're going to communicate, and then we're going to recalibrate as we continue to leverage the learning. Because the ultimate goal is a strategic work flexibility approach that allows managers, teams, and individuals to leverage work flexibility, technology, workspace on and off site. And that's important right now because we're getting ready to move from where it's primarily remote for a lot of people to where it's ultimately going to be a hybrid combination of remote and on site. And they're doing that with strategic, coordinated intention in the evolving flexible new normal to do our jobs, to achieve business goals, to manage our lives, and to rebuild the economic momentum that we need to rebuild. But I want to take a minute to break down this flexible work strategy approach into its component parts, because there are two parts to this, and it's really important to understand what role each part plays. So first, there's the infrastructure. This is the work flexibility, the time flexibility, the remote work, the technology, and again, those workspace options on and off site. This is the infrastructure that we leverage in order to do our jobs, achieve business goals, manage our lives, and rebuild the economic momentum. Now, interestingly, we tend to focus mostly on the infrastructure, especially in times of crisis. We want to make sure we have the right technology. We want to make sure we are optimizing whatever workspace option that we have. And we tend to, unfortunately, focus on policies around remote work when really ultimately policies can only do so much because there's one size doesn't really fit all. But again, it's important to have the infrastructure in place that makes sense. But again, alone, it isn't going to get us where we need to go because there's the second part of a flexible work strategy, and that is the culture of shared leadership. So this is the part where managers, teams, and individuals are leveraging with strategic coordinated intention. So in other words, they are using that infrastructure in order to achieve all the objectives that we need to achieve in terms of work, our businesses, and our lives. So you can see it really takes both parts of the puzzle to achieve flexible work success. And this is so critically important because, as I've said before, and I will keep saying, I really believe strategic flexible work is going to be our way through and out of this crisis. It's going to be an incredibly important component of it, whether it's during these very strict stay-at-home mandated periods, or again, as we begin to move into that more hybrid, remote, on-site, but also A and B teaming, shifting schedules. There's going to be more complexity to the way we work as we begin to move through the next phases of the crisis. And we're going to need both pieces of strategic work flexibility to make that a reality for everybody. Now, the challenge is that many organizations, I would imagine, moved into this crisis not only with the infrastructure implemented in probably a more siloed, uncoordinated way, but there probably wasn't much focus at all on the culture of shared leadership that's required to leverage that infrastructure in the way we're going to need to. So how do I know this? Well, I have, in all of the years that we have been approached to come into an organization and help them implement flexibility, I have never heard any version of this question. can you come in and give all of our people, our managers, our teams, our individual employees, the mindset, the skills, and the tools they need to partner in order to execute our business strategy but using flexibility, technology, and workspace in a coordinated way? I have never had any version of that question asked. Now, they can ask it at the end of the implementation. They understand what that's all about. But going into it, 9 times out of 10, the question is, can you come in and train our managers? So the bias is going into this crisis, chances are there was a sense that if we just train our managers to know how to do this, we will be able to be effective. But if you really think about it, it's very, very difficult for a manager alone to understand what needs to be done, how technology needs to be used to execute it, what type of workspace is going to work for everybody, especially for everybody that works for them, because people may have different jobs. So managers absolutely play a critical role. Their role is to do all that good management, all that good expectation setting and coaching and resource gathering and holding people accountable. Absolutely. There is also an extra layer of communication and coordination that managers have to implement and know how to do. But at the end of the day, the flexibility rests on a foundation of shared leadership where managers, teams, and individuals are meeting in the middle and partnering in order to get the job done. And in the crisis, there is a unique combination of trust, performance, and empathy that is required to build that foundation if it wasn't there already. Now, I will say all 3 of these attributes, all of these 3 components of the foundation are incredibly important in a crisis, but all the work that you will do in order to begin to set them in place will serve you later, because it's important even going forward. But again, in the crisis, how do you begin to establish this foundation of shared leadership? I'm going to start by looking at trust. Trust is so key. And to help you understand how leaders sometimes struggle with this, or everybody in that shared leadership model struggles with this, I'm going to share a story of a leader who called me last week. She and I have been speaking for a long time, and she is the leader of a 450-person department in a much larger service organization. And over this time, she has been intrigued by high performance flexibility. She sees the value of it, but she just hadn't gotten to the point where she felt supported by her leadership, where they had the bandwidth to actually do the work to make that culture shift happen. So here we go, 6 weeks later, that shift happened without her actually knowing that it was going to happen. It actually happened, and she's decided to use this as an opportunity to make the change. Work for everybody in the organization to get through the crisis, but then to take it to the other side. And one of the things that she said that was very surprising to her is how much, well, first of all, she calls herself a dinosaur about flexibility. And so she's learning as she goes. And the one thing that surprised her was how important it is to come at this assuming good intent, that everybody really is intending to do a good job and make things work. And you have to go with that assumption. And she's found it so critically important that she continually communicates this to everybody in her department, her managers, as well as all of her employees. And I have found that in all the years that I've done this work, that if you give people a degree of flexibility, they will give you more. And the 10% that perhaps might have trouble, if you look deeper, they tend to be just general performance problems, and it isn't related to the flexibility. However, unfortunately, there does seem to be this bias of abuse, of fear of abuse. And a great article was written recently by Sarah Milstein. She is the director of the engineers for MailChimp. And she has really mostly led distributed teams throughout her entire career. So she has a lot of deep experience with what it takes to lead in a flexible work environment. And she said in her work, she realizes that people come at the leadership role or the work within a flexible work team from either an assumption of trust or that trust needs to be earned. And she said, not that, people shouldn't be trustworthy and you shouldn't test their trustworthiness, but the assumption going in is that they will do a good job. I'm going to put a link to this article by Sarah on the archive page where we will archive this video, but take a time to read it, because she really makes some excellent points about why it's important to come at this from a perspective of trust. The next issue related to trust, and this is something the leader I spoke with last week was explaining to me, and it's very common, is that once everybody started working remotely and flexibly, all of a sudden the bar got weirdly high about expectations related to responsiveness and accessibility. So if somebody didn't get right back, people were assuming they weren't working and they were abusing it. And she said something I had told her a long time ago resonated with her when she realized that were people always immediately responsive when everybody was together in the same place? Actually, they weren't. You know, people could have been in meetings, they could be in the bathroom, they could be out getting lunch. You know, they aren't always there. So we can't have that bar raised even higher when people aren't physically with us. Now, that being said, you should have a protocol of communication in place that says, if I really need you, I will call you, because maybe you really just do need people right away. But otherwise, people will get back to you in due order, like they did when they were physically in the office, and just make sure that bar is not throwing you off because you've made it too high. And then finally, related to trust, this issue of tracking. When are you tracking and what are you tracking? It is very important that as you move to a flexible work culture, there's ways to measure performance. And everybody's got to be part of that conversation. And I find that everybody does understand that that is indeed important. Now, in terms of what you end up tracking and when you track, make sure that it makes sense for the job. So for example, if you have a call center job, it makes sense to track how many times you're on the phone and how long you're on the phone and how many clicks on your computer and all, because that's relevant to your job. But let's say you're an analyst and you do a lot of thinking work. So to track how often that person is on their computer and take screenshots of what they're looking at and when they're looking at it, I'm not sure that really serves telling you whether that person is doing their job. Another example, and I don't know what types of technology you have, but there was a law department we worked with, and they had a system called Law Manager. And that was a very valid way to track how a case was going through the system. The challenge there was not everybody understood how to use Law Manager that way. So again, maybe there's a need to train people on how to use the different technologies that you have, but whatever that is, make sure that it makes sense for the person's job. One last thing I just want to bring up is video conferencing. I'm getting a slight sense that there might be a use of video conferencing to kind of make sure people are working and being on point and available. And I just want to make sure that we're not overusing that, because it has to be valid for the activity. Like right now, we need to be on video. But there are plenty of calls that you had when everybody was on site that didn't have video involved in it. So you could even have a Zoom chat, but without the video, and that can relieve a lot of pressure on people who just may not have taken a shower, or maybe their kid is sitting there on the iPad quietly and they don't really want you to know that. And it's fine to just do the audio. So again, make sure you're tracking, using technology to track in the right way. The next consideration with this, in this crisis situation, relates to performance. And again, I will use the story of this executive who called me last week and her experience with how she's had to adapt performance expectations. So she said, which I thought was very interesting, she feels so grateful that her senior leadership has essentially said, you know, right now our job is to just keep things moving as well as we can. They don't believe that they need to bring in new service volume, but what could they be doing in order to continue to maintain the work that was already happening? And then what could be done in order to take care of some work that was maybe backlogged? And they're viewing that as performance. So in the case of this organization, she said they are getting through a lot of the backlog work that they had that perhaps wasn't priority, but just sort of sat to the side, that still needed to get done. And now that it's done, it's getting done. It's very important. Managers are actually having time to be strategic and plan. A lot of the things that they hadn't really thought about, reconsidering work processes, what could be done better and smarter, how they could maybe lead more effectively, cross-training. A lot of that stuff is happening right now. And again, that's not new production, but it's all serving ultimately the longer goal. So it's recalibrating those expectations. And also they've been helping in other teams. So it's reaching out beyond your immediate group and seeing what else can be done within the organization. So those expectations have been recalibrated and will continue to do so as priorities change. So this is the other key piece related to performance and this shared leadership model, is making sure you're always communicating what matters right now. And I know that's really hard because we're in such a disruptive, dynamic business environment right now, and priorities are just always shifting. But as long as you can keep everybody in the loop, organization-wide, then within teams, then within one-on-one, people have a sense of what they need to be planning for and prioritizing in terms of how they're executing their work, their own work, and then how they're coordinating with each other. So if you always remember, we are 6 weeks into this, so which is not a long time, but maybe it's time to look at your communications cadence that you have. Is it working? Is it keeping people informed about what they need to be doing and where the priorities are right now? And as we continue to adapt to the changing dynamics of this situation. And finally, measurement. How do you measure? Now, this executive confessed something that I see a lot. So when we go into organizations where there really hasn't been a culture of flexibility in place before, the honest truth is there really isn't a robust metric system in place typically. There is a default that if they're sitting there, they're here, they're working, sort of FaceTime presence equals performance measurement. And the reality once you get into a flexible work situation is you begin to see you can't obviously rely on that default. And you begin to also realize that maybe that wasn't really a valid way to measure anyway, because maybe they weren't actually working in the way you thought they were. But now you have to think about different ways to measure. And this is where together, as in this shared leadership model, you can begin to talk about that. What matters? What are we valuing right now? And as I say to people who already had a culture of flexibility going into this situation, measure what you were measuring before, because it shouldn't really change, but just adapt those metrics. So for example, if you were measuring quality, meeting deadlines, and volume, let's say, and all of those are slipping. So you want to then say, how are those being affected by this situation? So obviously quality, if it's slipping, maybe you want to ask, does my teammate, does that individual have the right technology to do the work that they are required to do? What is their personal situation? Have that sort of sense of the person as well as the number. Same thing with deadlines. Like if the deadlines are slipping, again, do they have the ability? Do they have the technology do they need? Do they have the support that they need? Is something happening personally that is causing them to miss these deadlines? And then volume obviously is just maybe the volume is not there. So what else could you be putting in place of that, like the leader did, to say to use this time in this moment in the crisis? And finally, empathy. We talked about the importance of trust. We talked about adapting performance expectations, but then here is a really important component. And what I want to share with you is an article written by a professor from INSEAD that was on HBR. I want to say it was last week. And again, I will put that link along with the other article on the archive page when we put the video up. But it was written by Gianpiero Petriglieri, and he puts forth a concept that I loved called institutional and interpersonal holding. It's a stance that a leader can take in a crisis situation that I think makes a lot of sense. And what it is, it's the leader is navigating their team or the people they lead through the institutional realities of the situation. So in other words, what is the business strategy? What are the priorities? What is going on with my job? You know, that is being led, that's being led, the way through that, the way to navigate through that is being made clear for people. But then on the other side, there's the interpersonal holding. And that's where you are being empathetic. You're being open to understanding how people are doing. You really care. You understand people are afraid. You're really helping people see that we're all in this together and that you really do understand. Now, I believe he wrote this article for leaders, but I believe it's a stance we all can take with each other. Because going forward, we are going to have to continue to navigate this balance between empathy and performance. And that balance is going to shift and change as the realities that we're facing change. So right now, we need a lot of empathy, but I'm also hearing from leaders that there is a real need to begin to understand how business models need to change, how we need to think about we're delivering services and getting back into servicing getting the business going that we are in. And that is something that needs to be a focus as well. But how do you figure out how much of that you want to focus on at any given time versus making sure there's the adequate amount of empathy to know that this is an unprecedented moment. People are afraid. It's overwhelming. So again, it's figuring out that both institutional and interpersonal holding for all of us. And I think that in terms of our team, so that's the leader, okay? And then we all can take this stance of empathy and performance, this balance between the two. So for example, with our teammates, so one of the ways we can do that is just continually to check in and just, again, making sure that with that trust and with that performance, adapting performance and communicating, our teammates are understanding that we care. Now, a good example of this is I'm going to go back to video chatting, to video conferencing, because I really do think that this is becoming a potential problem for organizations. Maybe some of your teammates, again, being on video all the time is adding an extra level of stress. And maybe it's time in that principle of let's keep recalibrating and leveraging the learning. Maybe this is a good moment for the team to step back and say, how much of this do we need to do on camera, and how much of this can we turn the cameras off, so that the people who are finding that stressful can get a break. Now, on the other side of that, maybe there really are things that are done better with video. And, they're just going to have to understand that, yeah, sometimes that's what we're going to do because that's how we're going to perform better. So again, it's that balance between empathy and performance. And then also just being empathetic with ourselves. Okay, I don't know about you, but I thought last week was really hard. I think it was that sort of the adrenaline of getting this going in the first few weeks and sort of wore off, and it became clear that this is going to go on for a while, and what does it look like? And there are days, I got to be honest, where I am great. Like I am just like, let's do this, let's make it happen. But then there's a couple days last week where I was just like, man, this is really hard. And you got to be empathetic with yourself and know that that is fine. And, keep that same balance for yourself as well. But it's all part of a whole foundation of shared leadership between your manager, with your team, individually with you, that rests on a level of trust that we're all coming at this from the right place, that performance, we're recalibrating as makes sense, we're measuring in a way that also accounts for the human element and all of this, and we're being empathetic. We're doing that institutional, interpersonal holding collectively, and we're keeping that balance between empathy and performance. So with that, we have created a tool for you, a little crisis insights tool that you can take, just walk through the questions to give you a sense of where you are as you come at this foundation of shared leadership, where you are joining your manager, teams, individual employees all together in order to create that culture that then allows you to leverage all of the infrastructure that enables us to execute a flexible work strategy. Now, we're going to continue this conversation on Thursday, this shared leadership conversation, and we're going to talk specifically about boundary setting and intention, but not perfection. What does that look like in action as we set boundaries to get our jobs done in collaboration with all the other people we work with, but while taking care of ourselves and also the other priorities in our life? And we are going to level up the quarantine daily routine. I don't know where that just went, the quarantine daily routine. And for those of you who attended last Thursday, we did implement this new personal management system based on the Tweak It practice that was in my book, Tweak It. And I did post my flowers by my bed on Twitter and on Instagram. So check it out and post yours. So with that, Lauren, are there any questions anybody has?
Okay, well, we have only about a couple minutes, so so far we don't have any questions. So if anybody wants to take advantage of the opportunity, go ahead and post your question now.
So I have a question for everybody. So going into this session today, would you say that your organization had a pretty solid foundation of shared leadership as it relates to flexibility, or would you say this is something that people need to work on? Because hopefully you can see now that not only is this something that will serve everybody in this current phase of the crisis, but ultimately, as we move through this and get to the other side, this is where you're going to want to stay, where you're going to want to continue that trust. You're going to want to continue to understand what performance looks like as a group, as a whole, not only individually. And then also you want to continue to have that empathy. Empathy needs to be part of our just daily life, and particularly right now, but again, going forward.
So Emily says it's a work in progress for her.
Okay.
And Joanne is saying, I feel strongly that we need to work on a culture of shared leadership in a national society set up on hierarchy. I'm exploring these models in collaboration with the nonprofit Reimagine Science, working on culture of science.
That's fantastic. I would love to hear more about that, actually, as I agree with you. Oh, that's so cool. Yay, go. That's excellent. That's
and then
great.
Sarah says, new and evolving. And I think those are the comments so far. Yeah.
Okay, so you know what? New and evolving is really where we need to be, and that's great. And so I hope today helped. And before I let you go, I just want to share with you again the inspiration I get from my friend Rosie the Riveter. I really do. I find her, she's like my totem right now. She's my beacon. I look at her because this is not easy, but I'm going to tell you right now, we can do this. Not only do we have to do this to make our way through this crisis, but at the end of it, when we come out the other side, we are all going to be even better positioned to thrive and just be our best selves and best organizations. But in the meantime, we're going to stay healthy and we're going to continue to move forward. And that's really what matters. So thank you very much. And I just urge you, join me on Thursday. And in the meantime, just stay healthy and keep reimagining work and life. Thank you all so very much for joining me.